we are joined by the football scientist himself, KC Joyner, ESPN.com, NFL Insider, and of course he covers also WWE for ESPN.com. And I had to play this because I know Mike Gill usually goes with Glorious, but I'm very counterculture. I'm very anti-establishment in my ways. I'm not a follower, Casey, so why not go with the ultimate anti-establishment man for the Attitude Era, right?
If I can say this, oh, hell yeah, just like Stone Cold would say. Yeah, exactly. I'm all for that, man.
Casey, how you doing on this Friday?
Doing very well. Looking forward to some college football this weekend. Good college football games this weekend. Michigan, Notre Dame with my son, and getting fired up for NFL.
So what I wanted to start with the Eagles, because obviously the three-man roster's got to get solidified this weekend, and you do a lot of position group gradings throughout the year. So I kind of want to give the audience a little perspective on the Eagles as a whole of a roster, because I always felt like, Casey, going into off seasons, a lot of times Super Bowl champions historically, they lose a lot of guys, right? A lot of times guys want to get new contracts, guys are coming to the end of their contracts, guys retire because they finally get their championship. And I feel like the Eagles, they've avoided a lot of the pitfalls that teams of the past have. When they lost Vinny Curry, they replaced it with Michael Bennett. They lose Bo Allen, they replace it with Julio Nada. And I think you could almost argue that on paper, the 2018 Eagles may be a better roster than on paper the 2017 Eagles.
I wouldn't disagree with that. In fact, I totally agree with that. They got Mike Wallace, who I think is better than Torrey Smith. We'll see. Wallace hasn't done much in the preseason, but I think he's an upgrade. They could get Jason Peters back. Sproles could be back if he's back to what he used to be, even if he can just do it for the one more year. That's an upgrade. You'll have Ajayi in the system now for an entire season as opposed to coming in the off season. And I think, I've got their offensive line as a top 6 unit, could be even higher. I did rankings for ESPN's fantasy section, got them ranked 6th, and I think it could be even higher if Peters pans out. So, in a nutshell, when I did my rankings for ESPN for the power rankings we have for coming up in the season, putting the Eagles at number 1 was probably the easiest pick among the whole group.
You mentioned the offensive line. Let's look at them for a second. Jason Peters coming back from that injury. To me, the big key for the Eagles' offensive line is Jason Kelce, because that's a guy who had a really great year last year, but the year before he was really not as good. So, do you feel like that line, as Jason Kelce goes, so goes the line?
I do, and I think that a lot of what they need to improve on it actually is pass blocking. I think the center's a big part of that, and getting Peters back, if he can play at the level he used to play, that can be a big plus. Because when I graded him for that article I was talking about, I gave the Eagles pass blocking a C, and it was one of the tougher grades to give because it was. Do I want to grade them where they were last year? How much do I want to emphasize putting Peters in there, and is it going to upgrade the offensive line? So I just said, okay, I'm going to leave that grade where it is right now and think that they've got upside, but I'll play it safe. I got to easily move that grade up because their run blocking is a B+. Their stability and consistency is an A. They bring back nearly everybody, and in fact, they've got the 3rd highest percentage of returning offensive line snaps, 99.3%, and the schedule is highly favorable, both from a run defense and a pass rush perspective. So I think the Eagles' offensive line, if it stays healthy, is going to dominate this year.
Lane Johnson, I know right tackles usually get a lot of recognition, but this is a guy who plays at a pretty high level. How do you rank him among all the offensive linemen in the NFL? How high up the ladder is he really? Because we know in Philadelphia, when he's in the lineup, the Eagles have had a very high winning percentage over the last couple of years, but when he's not in the lineup, they have a losing record.
Yeah, he's one of those guys. He kind of reminds me. It's a bit of a stretch, but I'll bring a name up from the past. A guy named Conrad Dobler. Conrad Dobler was a guy who brought a lot of toughness and meanness to offensive lines. They even called him once the dirtiest player in the league. And that's not what Johnson is. But what Dobler would do, you'd see him go to an offensive line that wasn't nearly as good. In fact, Richie Incognito was kind of like this. He'd go to an offensive line that talent-wise may not be quite as good as you would hope, and then he gets there and he adds so much toughness. It just rubs off on the other linemen where they see his physical style of play, and it makes them more physical. I think he doesn't quite do that for the Eagles because the Eagles already have a lot of physical players up front, but he adds that sort of dimension, that sort of toughness where when you see him grinding and run blocking, where I think he's really good, when you see him doing that, I think it's just a contagious thing. So I think that's why when he leaves, they're not quite as good because what he brings to that part of the game rubs off on the rest of the team.
Let's flip over to the receivers. I'm including receivers, not just wide receivers, because I think in some ways you kind of have to include the tight ends in that conversation because the way the Eagles use them. I remember in 2016, the Eagles were among the worst receivers in the NFL in terms of drop percentage, in terms of targets per reception. And then in 2017, they got much better. Obviously, the addition of Alshon Jeffrey helps. But also, I think that we're seeing the emergence of Zach Ertz as a primary target in this offense. So, heading into 2018, how do you rate the Eagles' group of receivers?
It depends on Jeffrey's health for one. Jeffrey's better than what he posted last year metrically because metrically he didn't post a double-digit yards per attempt total in any of the categories that I measure, both in for short, medium, deep, vertical, stretch, vertical, things of that nature. No double-digit numbers. He's capable of better than that, and he's got a favorable schedule. So he's going to be out for a couple weeks, but if he comes back and can be at full health, that could be a big upgrade for them there. He put up some solid numbers otherwise, but Aguilar had terrific numbers last year. I think that's going to be par for the course for him now. He put up 18.3 yards per attempt on stretch vertical passes last year. That's a really good number on aerial, stone 20 more yards downfield. And Ertz was at 13.5 yards on vertical passes on a yards per attempt basis and 22 on stretch vertical. Stretch vertical is kind of an anomaly because he only had 7 stretch vertical targets, but he had 28 vertical targets that got 13.5 yards per attempt. I mean, that's really impressive for a tight end, and I think he could be just as good, if not better, this year. So if they stay healthy and you add what Wallace did, because he posted some solid numbers in Baltimore, I think he could post even better numbers if he can play to his talent level and play better than he has in the preseason. If he does that, I really think that the Eagles' vertical game could be even better than it was last year when Wentz led the league with 20 vertical touchdown passes, even though they missed 3 games.
How do you feel Dallas Goedert's going to fit into this offense? Because he's a very different second tight end than Brent Selleck. Selleck was the blocking tight end who could catch, whereas Goedert is more of a receiving tight end like Ertz is. I think what Goedert's strength is that he's good at finding openings in space. So how do you think a guy like that working as a complementary to Ertz is going to fit into this offense?
I think it's going to be really interesting because you think of tight ends, they're not going to attack outside the hash marks usually. They can, but usually their value is down the middle of the field. And you usually don't throw a lot of vertical passes down the middle of the field. You got Ertz, you've got Goedert, and you've got Nelson Aguilar work in the middle as well. So you've got 3 players that can attack the middle of the defense in a way that most offenses aren't going to be able to do. So I think it's going to put a ton of pressure on teams if the Eagles decide we're going to use these guys in that way. I don't think that they're going to send them both on, say, vertical routes down the middle of the field or try and cross them or things of that nature very often, but when they do, it's going to get defenses fits.
KC Joyner joining us on the Boardwalk on a hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at KC Joyner TFS. Casey, the running back position, they saw it was by committee last year, and I know that a lot of people say, oh man, they lost LeGarrette Blount, but I think we overlooked the fact that Corey Clement was the one who led them in rushing touchdowns, and that Jay Ajayi had a very, very high yards per carry last year, and then you're getting Darren Sproles back as well. So is the Eagles' running back group really going to take that much of a step back without Blount?
I don't think so at all. Last year, Ajayi posted 9.1 yards per attempt in a metric I have called good blocking yards per attempt. Measures how productive a back is when you give him quality run blocking. That's a good number. It's top 15 in the league, close to top 10, and he had a double-digit good blocking yards per attempt in 2016. And if you get double digits in that category, it's elite. Very, very, very few backs are going to get up there. So I think he can be at or near that 9 to 10 level, which is elite. The Eagles have a very favorable matchup points total. I've got them as a green rating in matchup points this year. That's a highly favorable matchup. So I think they're going to do well there. I think Clement it can be even more productive than he was last year because he only averaged 7.6 yards per attempt on good blocking carries, and that's not a very good number. It's middle of the road. I think he's capable of better, and you've got the offensive line that can do it. So you add those two in there, and plus what you can get from Sproles if he can bring back his pass catching ability, and he's also done fairly well in good blocking yards per attempt on a small sample size. You add those 3 in there, and I think it could be if they stay healthy, and that's the big thing. But if they stay healthy, this is one of the top 10 running back cores in the league.
What does it say about scouting that the Eagles can get a guy, not this guy but coaching as well, get a guy like Corey Clement, undrafted free agent, turn him into this very productive player, a guy who what was it, 100 receiving yards in the Super Bowl. I mean, the guy had a phenomenal year last year from beginning to end, and he wasn't even drafted. So what does that say about a team's ability to scout a guy and then develop a guy as a coaching staff to take someone like him and make him now to almost a point where he's a major part of the offense?
It makes me. I want to give Howie Roseman a ton of credit, and I've got nothing but respect for what he does personnel-wise. And so you have to give him and his staff a ton of credit for for getting Clement and the coaching staff for developing him. But at the same time, Corey Clement led the Big Ten of rushing attempts in 2016. He's and Wisconsin had a good rushing attack, and he looked good. He's not Melvin Gordon. He wasn't one of their great backs at Wisconsin. They've had a lot of great backs, but he was really good. And it just makes me wonder at the rest of the league, why in the world would you think that this guy shouldn't be able to claim a roster spot with you at least, or why wouldn't you think this guy could pan out, or why he wouldn't be worth a chance? Because if Wisconsin thought he was worth 314 carries in 2016, you would think an NFL team would be thinking he'd be worth 50 to 100 carries at least.
Casey, let's flip it over to the defensive side of the ball. I know that it's not the sexiest thing in the world to talk about, but I think people overlook the fact that, there's a reason why the old saying is called defense wins championships, because you go back through the last 18 years in the NFL, the teams that win the Super Bowl, almost every one of those teams is rated in the top 10 in multiple categories in defense. So in your mind, is the Eagles' defense up to snuff to make another postseason run?
I do think that they are. I'll give you some metrics, and I measure metrics where green is good, yellow is okay, and red is bad. I color code the metrics, and if you're in a strong green rating, it means that you've got a really good number there. The Eagles had 19 interceptions according to my tracking, 26 near interceptions, and 45 interceptions, near interceptions, interception opportunities. Those are all strong green numbers, and yet if you look at the percentage of passes that they turned into interceptions, only 42.2% of their picks were turned into interceptions last year. That's a red-rated number in interception conversion rate. The nutshell of that is that even if they have fewer interception opportunities, if they turn a higher percentage of them into picks, they'll actually could get as many, if not more, interceptions this year. So I think that secondary is going to be ball hawking in a big time way.
Sticking with the secondary, the cornerback position was a concern heading into the season last year, but now it seems like it's a position of depth with Darby, with Douglas, with now Avonte Maddox added to Sidney Jones and Jalen Mills. So it looks like Sidney Jones might end up being the slot corner. We saw Patrick Robinson had a great year last year. So how do you think these cornerbacks are going to do in 2018?
Al Davis used to say that you can never have too many cornerbacks. He didn't. If he had 4, he wanted 5 good ones. If he had 5, he wanted 6. He just said at that position, given, especially today with the way it is in the passing, but he even thought that in the 70s it was more of a rushing league just because your cornerbacks are going to tend to get banged up and you need depth at position, and if somebody isn't very good at that position, it can lose you ball games. So to have as much depth as they do is a tremendous plus for Philadelphia. I'm hoping that with a secondary like that, they can improve upon their pass rush rate, because I had them last year at 11.5%, what I call pass rush impact play rate. Some people call it splash plays. It's where you're not going to pass down, hitting the quarterback, doing something to physically impact the play versus a hurry, which is a really weak way of judging pass rushing. But 11.5% was a middle-of-the-road number. I think the Eagles are better and capable of a better pass rush than that. So when you got this kind of secondary, if they can keep those cornerbacks healthy and start getting some shutdown in the secondary, I think it gives the pass rush more time to get the passers, and they can improve those numbers.
Speaking of that pass rush, that defensive line, they got a lot of guys to rotate in, from Chris Long, Derek Barnett, Brandon Graham, even though he's coming off of ankle surgery. Fletcher Cox says he wants to be Defensive Player of the Year. Tim Jernigan, he's going to miss the first 6 weeks because he's going to be on the PUP list, but you still have guys like Michael Bennett, Haloti Ngata. What are your expectations for that defensive line?
Again, the Eagles being smart, knowing that depth is the key to go to get a pass rush, to get and now they have a pass rush in the first quarter, but as Bill Walsh said, pass rush in the fourth quarter is the most important thing in the league. If you have a lot of people who can rush the passer, a lot of people who can and do it all across the line, get pass rushing with 3 technique or even 1 technique, and you can go to the outside to get it from the edge. If you can do both of those, you're going to be able to impact pass rush. And the thing about the Eagles is I expect their pass rush to be in a good place early in the season, because I'm looking at the how the teams they're facing, and actually, they're going to have a difficult schedule early on because 3 of the first 6 opponents that they face have very strong pass blocking grades. So I think that they're going to have some troubles early on. It gets more favorable the second half of the season, but early on, Philadelphia's going to have to. They may have to blitz more often, do something to manufacture a pass rush because I think the schedule is going to make it a little more difficult for that pass rush to step up.
Where do you rate Fletcher Cox among the defensive linemen in the NFL? We know Aaron Donald just got that whopping $87 million guaranteed, but we know Fletcher Cox is pretty great in his own right. So how do you rate him among the defensive linemen in the league?
He's got that kind of an impact. I'd probably take I don't want to think about him from this perspective, but he's on my fantasy team, so of course I really want him to do well. I got him in a keeper league, and he's an IDP, and I'm like, yeah, I really wanted to do well because I've kept him around, and he cost me like $8 in that. But where do I think he is? I think that he's a guy who. He's one of those players. I hate to use this measurement, but he's one of those players to where a lot of times his impact doesn't show up on the stat sheet. Where he can be so effective, he can make those around him better. So you may not see him making all the big impact plays. Again, my fantasy team wishes he would, but may not see him making all the impact plays. But he has such an impact on the offensive line. They've got to account for him in such a way that he assures that other people are going to get a lot of single team blocks. You're always going to get that anyway because even if you're rushing 4 and the offense has 5 blockers or 6 to bring in a tight end, you're going to have a couple people blocked, but you now on defense know we're going to get a double with him, and we have an idea who we're going to be able to single with, and that really makes it a lot easier for the rest of the players.
Jim Schwartz is a very interesting guy in terms of league history. He's a guy who got his start in the NFL because of Bill Belichick. He coached defensive coordinator previously under Jeff Fisher, and then he went to Detroit, defensive coordinator for 1 year in Buffalo. But you look at every time he gets to year 3 as a coach previously. In Tennessee, much improved defense. Detroit, much improved defense year 3. What can we expect from Jim Schwartz in year 3 for the Eagles?
I think he'll probably follow that same path in part because if you look at the Eagles' offense, look at their schedule early in the season. They've got Atlanta, a team that they could get in a shootout with, and so he can be aggressive. He's going to have to be aggressive on defense because I just think the game's going to set up for that. Then you got Tampa Bay, you got Indianapolis, Tampa Bay with a backup quarterback, Indianapolis with Luck and a terrible offensive line, their bottom 5 offensive line. You got Tennessee, it's a low-scoring team, and then you got Minnesota, who also is kind of they don't have the best offensive line. I'm looking at some of these matchups, looking at the Giants in Week 6, and looking at all that start of the season, I'm thinking, can the Eagles get a lead in these games? Yeah, I think in most of these games they can get leads because if you can get his defense, his aggressive defense playing with a lead and you've got ball hawkers back there, it can be for a really big, it makes for some big impact plays. So I have a feeling that he's going to have to be aggressive early on. He's going to get the opportunity to be aggressive. Atlanta's going to make him be aggressive, but I think he's going to have the opportunity to be aggressive in the other games because the offense is going to help him do that. And I think we're going to be able to see what he can do as a coach because that's when he's best, when he can pin his play calling ears back, proverbially speaking, and then get after the passer.
KC Joyner joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN, ESPN.com, NFL Insider. Follow him on Twitter at KC Joyner TFS. KC, looking around the league compared to the Eagles, obviously the Eagles are now the hunted. They're no longer hunting. They're no longer underdogs anymore. So who are some of the teams that you look at and you're saying, these are the teams hunting them? We know that you get the Vikings out there, you get the Rams out there, the Giants in their own division, Aaron Rodgers and the Packers. He's going to be threatening. So, is there a team or two or even 3 or 4 that you're looking at and you're saying the Eagles better watch out? These teams are coming.
I think New Orleans could be on that list. New Orleans had the best offensive line in the league in that metric article I talked about recently. I think that, and when you've got that kind of offensive line, you can dominate games in a way that other teams can't. The Eagles can do that too, but I think that they've got a ball hogging defense that can do that. I still say the Rams, talent-wise, what they added Cooks and they've with Sue and everybody else. I mean, that's a team that got frozen. They froze up in the postseason last year, so I think they're capable of doing a lot better than that. They won't freeze up this time around. If I'm the Eagles, I really probably don't want to see the Rams in the playoffs at all, or at least until the conference championship game, because I think the Rams are going to be a team that can give them a run for the money.
Staying with the Rams for a moment, you talk about a team that, you added 2 high-level corners. You add in Ndamukong Suh on that defensive line, but you trade away Alec Ogletree, a guy who probably didn't fit as well in the Wade Phillips scheme. I know that statistically they were not a very good run defense, were the Rams last year. So you add 2 corners, and add in Ndamukong Suh. How did those additions improve the Rams D?
They led the league if you add sacks, interceptions, near interceptions, those three together. They led the league in that category last season, and they didn't have a very high interception conversion rate either. So they could actually do even better in picks this year. And you've got Sue up the middle, and Sue is he can, if he's motivated, and I think he will be motivated here in a way he wasn't in Miami, because he sees that he's going to see that this team has a chance to go play for championships. And I think he realized in Miami that just wasn't going to happen. You get him playing up to his potential, and you get a defense that last year had 6 return touchdowns. They had 88 pass rush impact plays, which is a really high number. You start putting some of those things together, and they have one of the most favorable pass blocking matchup schedules in the league. If you're looking at as far as just being able to what the favorability of the teams they face from a pass blocking perspective, I think they've got one of the best schedules in the league in that perspective. So I think the Rams are going to be they're the type of team to where you really are not going to want to let them get in a roll early on. If you let them get out to a 10-0 lead in the game, something of that nature, they get out to an early lead, that this kind of defense can make that thing 24-0 in no time.
Casey, I know a lot of people talk about the NFC South as potentially one of the most competitive divisions in the NFL, but the division that fascinates me even more is the NFC North, because you got Rodgers coming back from injury. He just got paid big time. You have Kirk Cousins going to Minnesota to take over their quarterback position. You have a new head coach in Detroit and a new head coach in Chicago. So what is your perspective on the NFC North?
I'm really curious, because people think that the Packers are going to be this dominant team, and I know Rodgers, he's one of those players who he's like what Luck was a couple of years ago, where you look at the rest of the Colts and you say that team shouldn't be in the conference championship game, and yet Andrew Luck is good enough to raise them to that level. Rodgers is every bit probably better than that even. So I like him from that perspective. Every one of those teams does a really tough schedule. They've got their matchup point schedules. I have a couple other metrics called shootout points and some other schedule rankings. They've got really tough schedules. So that can be good if you look at, historically speaking, if you face a tough schedule. It can favor you when you get to the playoffs. That can make it a lot tougher to get there. And I still look at Green Bay and go, the run blocking is good, but I don't care about the running backs. And this is still a team that I don't ever know why they switched from we're going to be a run heavy and throw vertical type of club, and now they tend to be more pass centric. I don't think that's good for what they are. Adams is not really a vertical threat. Geronimo Allison's not what they need. Cobb he might even be cut this weekend. And Jimmy Graham is a red zone threat, but he's not a guy who can really stretch the field otherwise. So I look at them and I see a lot of limitations. Same thing with Minnesota. I see a lot of limitations on that team. Their defense is nowhere near as good as people think it is. It's structurally sound, but it's not personnel-wise. It's not as good as it is, and their metrics are never that good. So I think this is one of those. Yeah, this is one of those divisions where they're gonna get the BO back in black and blue and knock each other in the mouth and things. Whoever gets out of it is probably gonna have a solid chance of getting an upset in the playoffs, but it's gonna be tough to get out of that division.
Casey, every year there's a team that didn't make the postseason the year before that makes it the next year. We see it every single year. In fact, 4 or 5 teams from the NFC didn't make it the year before who made it in 2017 season. So who are some of the teams that you're looking at? To me, I look at a team like the Giants, think they could be a candidate for it. Who are some of the teams that you think are candidates for I didn't make the postseason last year, but I'm in it this year category?
49ers should top that list. Absolutely, 49ers should top that list. Jimmy Garoppolo, you look at his resume and you say he hasn't started that many games, but when you start looking at the tape and you start looking at the metrics and you start looking at what he's done, you can see why New England wanted him. You can see why San Francisco said, you haven't done much starting for us, but we're going to go ahead and give you a starter caliber contract. You can understand why. Marquise Goodwin is a very good receiver. They got Garcon. They've got some talent around them. They added McKinnon in the backfield. McKinnon could be Devontae Freeman for them. They've got some talent there. And Kyle Shanahan is the most creative play caller in the league. You start breaking down how he calls plays and the things he does in mixing concepts and things together, nobody else does anything anywhere near what he does. So I look at that and say that it's not a guarantee that they're going to make the playoffs, but they're also in the division that isn't exactly, they got the Rams, but the rest of the division is not that powerful. And I think the NFC, from a wild card perspective, I think it's a wide open race for that. So I'd like San Francisco for a team that's going to make it.
KC Joyner joins us each week on the Sports Bash here on 97.3 ESPN. Follow him on Twitter at KC Joyner TFS as we are getting right into the NFL season. He joins Mike Gill on the Sports Bash each and every week. Casey, I hope you have a great Labor Day weekend. I know I'll be glued watching the college football all weekend. And, of course, football is back, so there's no better time.
It's a great time of year. This is and it's perfect weekend to get started. Lots of good games this weekend, and then we're off and running next week, man. It's finally here.
Finally here. Can't wait. Thanks, Casey, for the time.
Appreciate it, man.